Hello everyone, this is part 2 of our review of Batman Caped Crusader. This part is going to go into each episode and we're going to be talking about actual spoilers, so we'll be going way more into depth. We will be rehashing a lot of things that we talked about in the last part, but giving like actual examples, and we can go way more in depth about it. We can actually talk more about our biggest criticism of the show, which has to do with a certain few episodes that we think really went off the rails of what the show is trying to do with the character.
I also think it's worth noting all of these episodes are kind of like the original show. You can watch them without having to watch the next. There's not kind of a continuous story that runs between. There's not an overarching antagonist for the whole season. There's just kind of an episodic structure to it in which there's one antagonist per episode, and that's kind of how it builds. There are subplots that kind of connect throughout each episode, but ultimately you can watch your 20 minutes and not have to tune in next time.
I almost like and dislike that. I like when movies do that, where it feels like you can watch this movie, it stands alone by itself, it doesn't require you to watch a previous movie, but watching that previous movie adds on to the experience. I personally like shows that have those stakes. Like, shows are designed, like, the writing style for a show is different to a movie. They lock you in. It's designed to lock you in. This show isn't that way. It really does resolve its plot points, which every episode of a show should do, but it usually doesn't have that kind of next step that a lot of more serious shows have that I kind of wish it did. In the same realm, I mean, I love Adventure Time. Adventure Time doesn't really do what I'm saying. I think the main issue is certain episodes feel very out of place compared to others. So we're going to start out with the first episode, which is called In Treacherous Waters. This is all about the turf war between Rupert Thorne and the Penguin that Batman has to investigate. How do you feel about this first episode? I think it's a very good introduction to the show. Immediately, we understand what type of Batman this is. Very prepared, very intelligent Batman who knows exactly what he's doing. And I also thought Penguin was pretty well characterized. I don't think this was a super deep episode writing wise, but one thing it does introduce as well is also Bruce Wayne's character and how Bruce Wayne differs in character compared to Batman. It's a very stark difference.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the episode for that aspect. I think that's kind of like the strongest part of this episode. I love the incredibly awkward smile he gives when he first shows up on the boat. I love that he makes a joke to Barbara Gordon and she doesn't laugh at it, so he goes off to two other people and he makes the same joke to get their kind of reaction he wants. You really get the impression from him that he is just this phony person. There's one thing that I can't believe we didn't even say in the last video, but the voice cast here is phenomenal.
Batman is incredible. Like, his voice is really, really good. I'm so glad we got a new person for this. I love Kevin Conroy, but I do believe, like, when we're looking at voice acting as an industry, when it comes to video games, when it comes to shows, when it comes to animation, it's super harsh. Probably more harsh than acting, maybe. It's sort of the same people cycled over and over again. I'm really glad to see someone new. Has this actor been in any Batman related things before?
I believe he was in the Fantastic Four movie a very long time ago, one of the early ones. So he's a comic book fan. And I also think like at some point, Loris, if you get the chance, I really do think you should watch an interview with this guy because he's a real awkward little dude. He doesn't sound like this.
You were thinking of Kevin, but you didn't necessarily need to study him because you needed to make it your own, right?
Well, I loved Kevin's Batman so much, and I just wanted to, have there be more of this content in the world. Like, I just loved the show so much, and I wanted, as an audience member, to have more of this. I don't want there to be a bump on Batman. I want, as an audience member to have.
Like Kevin Conroy ultimately, when at work or when at home, the guy sounded like Batman. This guy, like he really is ultimately changing his voice to kind of bring this to it. And everyone here is like hasn't really done stuff before in terms of this. Like no one is playing a character they've played before, and I really enjoy that. Like, of course, we had the voice of Harvey Dent. Some people might not have even noticed, but he actually played Batman in Batman Brave and the Bold a few years ago. So there's that. But like besides that, really, everyone here is it's a completely new sound and a new take to everything.
Last thing when talking about the first episode is in the trailer, it seemed like Penguin would be more of a main player and would evolve, but Penguin in this show is a flat character. It's not bad to have a flat character. I think flat is actually a wrong word. Just more of a simple character. She doesn't evolve. Her motives don't really change. She doesn't really have a super big motive, which I think is the downside of her character. So this first episode is more so a kind of soft introduction into this universe. It's just there to set up all these characters. Like it sets up Gordon, sets up Barbara, it sets up Alfred, I think a little bit. It sets up a lot of different characters that you need to see in future episodes. I do think I like the surprising amount of violence that this show has compared to B-Task though.
Oh yeah. I mean, opening scene, we get a very interesting demonstration of that where a man shoots someone else in an attempt to get at Batman. I think some people mightn't like that, but I kind of like that because I think immediately it establishes that this show, the stakes are not the same. Episode 2, and Be a Villain. This is the Clayface episode. It's kind of like this episode that's really kind of set in like 40s kind of Hollywood, and I think there's a lot of great action set pieces in this one. The introduction to Clayface here, I really like it because it's a detective story from the perspective of Renee Montoya. I wouldn't say like she's my favorite character in the show, but I really like her. Like I think I really like her characterization here. I love her relationship with Jim. They're particularly close, especially because now Bullock isn't really in the same circle as Jim Gordon and like Renee Montoya here, so I like their dynamic. And she's also very close with Barbara as well. And there's also a great opening scene here where she's interrogating Bruce Wayne. And Bruce Wayne is like he tries to bribe her because for one, it's gonna make him look like, an asshole. But for him it's also about finding out whether or not she's a good cop.
Yeah, it was very intelligent move to make himself seem like an idiot, just billionaire, like weirdo, but also it gave him information, it gave him a clue on what's happening. This episode was great. It's definitely a more disconnected episode, but being that it was episode 2, it did really well, especially since this is supposed to characterize Renee Montoya. So this is another crime mystery that Batman is solving, and it's really iconic. It does it really well. Clayface, like we talked about in the last episode, really like this unique take on him that you don't really see that often.
Absolutely. I think it's definitely stronger than the first one, but I wouldn't make this the pilot. I'm just gonna say this ahead of time before we kind of dive into the rest of the episodes. I think the first 4 episodes and then the last 2 are the best in the season. Following off from episode 4, there's an unfortunate downfall that kind of happens. I think the first 4 episodes really work in tandem with each other. But this episode's great. Like as I said, there's an Easter egg for some old movies. I think it's called is it something Pendulum? I don't know.
Yeah, the Pendulum movie that I think I saw that in like my film history class.
Yeah,
And I like the director and like it kind of just highlights parts of like the production that's like stereotypical like directors and all the different aspects and like people on the film being like assholes and like caricatures. I really like that element.
and Clayface is playing as some of the suspects. Not nearly as tragic as like the original kind of B-Task version of him, which kind of really kind of changed the direction of him. But I think in terms of paying homage to what the character originally was, and also doing something kind of new in the same breath, I really enjoyed this. This is a really fun outing for the character.
Okay, so episode 3, Kiss of the Catwoman, it's a isolated kind of story, but it is another really good episode that is all about Selena Kyle. And actually, there is some really good story elements to this because I think this is the first episode where Batman starts visiting a therapist, which is Harleen Quinzel. Am I correct about that?
You are indeed.
The writing was really tight in this episode when it comes to the theming because I feel like what this episode really was about is privilege. We see two
Yes.
different stories going on between two people who have privilege but in a different way. So we have Bruce Wayne who ends up punching someone who makes a comment about Bruce Wayne's parents. He snaps, he punches the guy, and he has to go to therapy to prove that he's not going to be a danger to anyone else. And this is the episode where you really get a sense of this guy is pretending.
I really like. I think a lot of people kind of don't like this version of Catwoman, or well, I'm not gonna say a lot of people, but I've heard different ideas about it. But I really do enjoy this interpretation of her because I think especially if they bring her back, it makes their relationship a lot tighter. Because at the end of this episode, Catwoman goes to her traditional position where she doesn't have her privilege anymore. That has been something that is completely lost from her. But throughout the course of the episode, we see her kind of fighting for her right for it, and we get to see how she's treated as a result of the privilege that she's inherited from the people before her, mixed in with flashbacks of Bruce Wayne as a child that we get to see during his therapy sessions. We kind of get to just see how thick the walls are with Bruce, because I was wondering with this plot here, when we saw it in the trailers and we saw them discussing this, I was wondering, like, how are they going to do this? Is this going to be a reoccurring thing throughout the show? Is he going to get really close to this person? Is this going to be... But no, not even remotely. It's the same sort of thing with Alfred, where even his therapist not letting in whatsoever, and even though he's not relaying information to his therapist, we as an audience get to see kind of the inner workings of his head. I love these flashbacks. I think these flashbacks are really telling about this character, and we also get to see kind of how awkward a situation Alfred has been thrown into and how he really does not know how to handle it at all. He only kind of knows how to do the norm for this child. He only knows how to kind of give him things to try to make him feel better. But under this extreme trauma, this is not the reaction that he ends up giving. Something entirely new comes out of this boy, and Alfred is kind of like a little bit unsettled by it.
So this is the episode where basically after Bruce Wayne's parents die, Alfred takes him home. Alfred tries to kind of cheer him up, but it's very tone deaf and doesn't help at all, really. And we see that Bruce Wayne has devolved into a very traumatized child because he wakes him up in the middle of the night and basically says I'm gonna make them all pay. When you really think about this is not surprising. I mean, this is a child. They don't know how the real world works. This is also a rich child, so they really don't know how the real world works. Of course, this traumatized child wants to get revenge. I'm sure he wanted to kill the person who killed his parents, and now he has to wrestle with that for another decade. He's sort of refined his creepy side.
Yeah.
He's able to shield it. Even as Batman, it's almost like he's really not revealing who he is. It's very subtle in a sense where even when he's Batman, he's sort of lying to people. And it's only until episode 5 where he actually emotionally responds to someone.
I also really enjoy the misdirection in the scene as well, because we see that Bruce is kind of starting to put together the memory of what happened in that alleyway on that night. And as he does, we see Alfred in his bed, and you kind of get the impression of because every child has had the occurrence where you wake up from a nightmare or something and you go into your parents for safety. And I like the misdirection of, instead of this boy going in there to kind of snuggle under the covers with this kind of father figure of his, we get the complete opposite of that. And I really like that misdirection because in some interpretations of the character that is very in line. A lot of I like to kind of almost refer to Bruce Wayne in a lot of interpretations as just this kind of crying child. He's upset constantly and he's being fathered by Alfred, but in this version we see that he doesn't even get the chance.
It feels more real to me. The only a child this messed up would ever become the Batman.
Absolutely.
I think the last thing I want to talk about with Kiss of the Catwoman is
The car?
The car. That was really cool. The Catmobile was awesome. Would I even call that fan service? I don't know. I don't think anyone was asking for the Catmobile, but I really liked it.
Episode 4, The Night of the Hunters. This one, you said this one was your favorite. I think this one might be my favorite, to be honest. This one has a really nice change of direction, and it also firmly kind of establishes a lot of the themes. In the previous episode, we actually saw Batman kind of enlist the help of this photographer, and this leaves the previous episode in this really nice send-off where these photos of Batman attacking the police, particularly Harvey Bullock and Officer Flass, are spread out, and we get to see the ramifications of this. Harleen Quinzel consults the officers and kind of tells them about how he has a pattern of going after masked criminals, kind of like himself. And so therefore that implants the idea in Bullock and Flass's minds that they should release a costumed criminal out into the world to kind of summon him after a series of failures in which they try to kind of bait Batman.
There's so much that this episode does for so many characters. Something we were talking about earlier was the privilege in Kiss of the Catwoman, and how, like, this is a total kind of flip on that, where Firebug, this is like their version of Firefly, is almost a completely sympathetic villain. Like, you really don't feel any hatred towards Firebug. At least I didn't. He's a victim of what honestly is like police negligence, like corruption in the police department. This is a mentally ill person who you literally get to see through their eyes what they see. They see a world that is not adhering to reality. So whatever they do in reaction to this world they see in their head, it cannot be used against them. Firebug is an innocent man, and it's not his fault that anyone got hurt in this episode. So the police basically, as a cover story, act as if they are negligent. They're just dumb cops that happen to let Firebug escape, and it harmed a bunch of people. But in reality, we know the real story. They did that on purpose, so they're purposely negligent, and this is something that happens a lot in real life and goes unpunished. Bullock and Flask are rewarded for this, actually, at the end of the episode. So basically, they let Firebug escape, and he ends up burning down a giant apartment complex. And I like the little detail that Jim Gordon, like, this was his, I'm assuming, his, like, home neighborhood. This is where he's from. The fact that his neighborhood is being destroyed because of the police is almost ironic. But at the end of the day, Jim Gordon acts like a hero. He has so much responsibility. He comes in and tries to remedy the situation. And it's our first time where we see Jim Gordon and Batman sort of working together. Jim Gordon wants to take Batman in, but at the end of the day, it's way more morally right in this situation to work with him to get these kids out of this building. It's such a great episode because it explores all those themes, but it also ends in a very tragic way where Flask and Bullock end up murdering the Firebug. It's so twisted in so many ways because this is why they're rewarded. And Firebug was out of juice. He was basically harmless at this point. He couldn't burn anything else, and he wasn't even a threat to Bullock at that time. He just chose to execute him right there. And he falls out of the window, destroys a car. Everyone sits there watching. This episode wasn't about criminality.
Yeah, definitely, and especially kind of when we go from the previous episode where we see Catwoman get a mere slap on the wrist because of her privilege that she's inherited. We then go from seeing the criminal courts being corrupt to seeing how the inner workings of the police department are also corrupt. And I think it's a great thing because, as you've kind of staged already perfectly, I think Firefly is not really the villain because he was already locked up. Obviously, he's committing some pretty terrible acts, like he shouldn't be doing what he's doing, but he's a man with a problem. And these people have provoked him into this situation. And they are not just criminals, well, they are criminals, but they are criminals with a badge. And I think that is such an excellent theme. And as you've mentioned before, with how this is Gordon's home, that is being burnt down in front of him, and how he's not able to get rid of these cops afterwards because the mayor is so on his case about Batman, and how now that these hero cops have come in to the media anyway, he can't get rid of them. We see how the kind of corruption in the police force escalates continuously, how even the commissioner doesn't have any real power here over what's going on, and they've staged it perfectly. In the hallway, I love when Jim Gordon comes up to Batman and Batman turns around and he's holding the two children. Because I just love when we get to actually see him kind of saving somebody. And there's not like too many instances of him going out there and doing this in the show, but here is an instance of it, and I really enjoy it in this one because it's one of the few moments where the character, you know, they've been baiting him for the whole episode up until this point, and then Gordon kind of gets to see what he's doing, and then he looks outside and he sees that ultimately this man is not the criminal he needs to be chasing. It's the people, unfortunately, who work outside of his own office.
I don't want to dwell too much on this episode because it is really
Watch
good.
it for yourself.
Yes,
Like,
like
honestly.
if you have not, if you're watching this video and you haven't watched it, what is wrong with you? But also watch it. Let's actually get into episode 5. We're gonna be spending less time on the next 4-ish episodes because they're not as good. Okay, the show, unfortunately, like it falls off, and it's really weird. It indicates to me that something happened behind the scenes. I just don't know. The quality, not just in the writing, but sometimes in the animation, falls off in these episodes. That being said, episode 5 might be the strongest of these next 4 episodes. Basically, Batman and Robert Gordon are set on a collision course where they investigate the abductions of rich people in Gotham, and they're both led to the same person, which ends up being Barbara's friend, Harley Quinzel. On paper, what they're trying to do with Harley Quinn here is perfect. It is great. And her performance as Harley Quinn has a similarity to Batman where when she becomes Harley Quinn, she is a different person. Literally, like her voice changes. And I'm almost led to believe that she has some kind of split personality
Yeah.
where she's not in control. Actually, basically, she's abducting all these rich people. These are selfish, horrible people who look down on people below them. But she's also a classic case of solving the problem in the wrong way, where she's abducting them and like effectively torturing them in a like ironic way based on like what they've done to other people. It's really twisted. It's a really great idea, but at the same time, the writing is just a little bit off, and I don't really know what it is.
Yeah, I think the main issue with this episode for me at least, I think a lot of the kind of foundational things are there. But I think and honestly this has just occurred to me now. And I could be completely wrong. Like ultimately I don't work at Warner Brothers or fucking Amazon Prime, so I don't know what happened. But I think there might have been a possibility that this might have been maybe around the time that the show got dropped by HBO. And they might have just been like trying to rush to get this thing finished, and they might have just not have taken their time because they might have just been kind of under this stress of the whole situation of what are they going to do about it because the whole show's fate is now up in air. So now they just need something out there because I think the foundation work of this is really good, but it kind of just feels like a first draft because it feels super superficial. It feels like it doesn't go hard enough. Like Bruce doesn't feel all that betrayed, or at least we don't get the opportunity to see enough of his perspective because I think this episode kind of leans into some of my further issues with the rest of the series, and that's the fact that unfortunately, the show doesn't rest enough on the lead character's shoulders for us to really see what's going on for him and for what the conflict is for himself. And I think this episode being told on Barbara Gordon, of course, it develops her character because this is her friend ultimately. But we've seen Bruce Wayne's affiliation with this person more. So for us, we don't really get to sympathize with Barbara's unfortunate, like, sudden understanding or betrayal from her friend because our exposure to this character in terms of privacy with her has been through the eyes of Bruce Wayne.
In previous episodes and in this episode, Harley is sort of a colleague, and there's not much stakes to it, especially since we already know she's Harley Quinn. And
Yeah.
now the characters are finding out. So there's not much stakes to it because we know this is going to happen. We already know who it is. And so there's no mystery for us. And then there's another issue where, like, Batman finds these clues. It's honestly pretty easy to figure out that it's Harley Quinn. And Batman just shows up. It feels rushed. There was a climactic ending. At least it was trying to be climactic by having like this whole mansion falling apart and then Harley Quinn kind of having a little bit of a hesitation. She goes back to save Batman and Barbara, hinting at kind of like a split personality.
Well, she sees Barbara's car and she realizes she's back there. But like there's no kind of it's not a personal kind of thing that develops like I don't know. I just think her character is super strong, I think, because unfortunately, and maybe some people would disagree with me on this, I don't enjoy modern Harley. And that's not because she's not the Joker's partner, not at all. Do not think that that's what I want from the character. But I just think they run into this gag with her where she's ultimately a big jokester and she's just kind of this absolutely insane lunatic who acts like a child when she's also a psychotherapist. This woman is incredibly smart, and yet her stories are dumbed down to have this childlike nature where it's funny and it's poppy, and she's also sexualized to shit. And I don't enjoy that interpretation. So this one, I really was looking forward to, but as kind of stated previously, it just kind of feels like a first draft. Like, the inner workings of the character weren't there to kind of fully appreciate them. I think for what they set up for Harley Quinn, it would have been so much nicer if the tension built with us being able to see her perspective of the fact that because if you're going to do the reveal so quickly where everyone finds out that it's her already, then she should be on top of that. The tension should build from her knowing that people are closing in on her. How does she keep lying to these people? Because in this, instead, she's a fucking terrible liar.
Yeah, I think it's not that it's absolutely horrible, it's just that it's so much missed potential. Like, I think we're gonna get at an idea later that some of these episodes should have been cut, and there should have been other episodes after. Like, episode 9 and 10 should have been, in my opinion, the mid-season finale. And maybe Harley Quinn is a reoccurring character that ends up being the main villain at the very end of the season
Yeah, I agree.
that is under everyone's skin, because we get the moral failing of the system with Harvey Dent, which we'll get into. And then Harley Quinn could have been the moral failing of Batman as a person. I mean, she's a psychiatrist. She really does psychoanalyze this guy. She already knows who Batman is. She just knows. It's just a big missed opportunity.
But just to ramp up a point from earlier that was mentioned, we talked about something that does occur in season 5, which is development for Batman's character, in which he apologizes to Barbara Gordon after she loses Harley Quinn in the water. And I think that this moment, I think, is really well acted. But you kind of get an impression from Batman that he's understanding there's a situation that has occurred here in front of him that he's familiar with, but he does not know how to kind of actually help.
Well, I think at first he is literally in autopilot mode where all he thinks about is the practical events. Like, he's not thinking about, oh, this person just lost a friend. He's thinking about, why did you end up in this situation? He's like not thinking about it on an actual emotional level. And then when she starts crying, he starts to apply perspective to it. Like, it's not just a job anymore.
Yeah.
And it kind of shows that he's tone deaf. With that said, Harley isn't defeated. So, I mean, she could show up in season 2. There's still more to her character that could be explored, and her relationship with Montoya is kind of cut off, and that could lead to future plot points. Maybe Montoya wants to find her. So it could lead to something else, but this was not the best introduction to the Harley Quinn character. So moving on to episode 6, I really don't want to spend too much time on this one.
I think it's kind of our least favorite, I'd say.
Either that one or episode 8, like they're really tied. I might even say episode 8 is actually my least favorite. Basically, this one is all about Gentleman Ghost. So basically, this episode is not only about Batman fighting Gentleman Ghost, but also about Harvey Dent. So Harvey Dent has begun to campaign for mayor. He's not looking so hot in the polls, and he's actually been approached by Rupert Thorne, who wants to fund his campaign. Harvey Dent's not a fan of Rupert Thorne, but I think this is a trap that many politicians fall into, is sometimes it's a necessary evil. You have to take money from bad people to maybe make a difference with that money in the future. It ends up not working that way, but you can understand why Harvey Dent would do this. He's definitely hesitant to trust Thorne, and actually he rejects this offer at first.
This episode just goes way too off the rails. I think this one, like everything around it, like especially going from episode 4, so many themes are so well established. And then in episode 5 that I think kind of pigtails off them and doesn't necessarily, hit the landing as much. Then this one it goes into another sector that I really don't think we needed to go into.
Feels like a whole different show, man.
Yeah, it's very unusual, and it tries to paint a light on Bruce and Alfred's relationship by giving them a moment together towards the end of the episode in which Alfred is hurt, and Bruce comes to the realization that he does kind of need this person in his life. But it's such an unusual, landscape for this event to unfold for them, I think, because I don't think the stakes really have quite the gravity that, you'd want from this. Ultimately, I didn't personally, while watching this episode, feel any actual kind of threat or danger for Alfred or for even Bruce. It's a very unusual set of circumstances for this to happen. And Bruce also just kind of learns ghosts are real and is just like,
Yeah,
cool.
that's my main issue with this episode, is that it's so odd that they used this episode as a foundation to build Alfred and Bruce's character, because Alfred is like the one that immediately believes it's a ghost, and then Batman's super hesitant to believe that, even though he's punching through the sky and it's doing nothing. And but it's so bizarre because, like I said, and something I've complimented already, is that this show feels more grounded. It feels a bit more realistic, not just in the way it looks and the way things happen, in the representations, but also in the writing. Characters just act more like they would act. Things don't coincidentally come together, and I think that's the main issue we have with episode 5. In this one, it's all of that together, where things happen. This gentleman ghost just has no reason being in this show. It's such a bizarre, out of left field character that I guess kind of talks a little bit about Bruce Wayne's identity as a billionaire, because this is a selfish guy from the 1800s who was privileged. But it fails at that. Once you start inviting the supernatural, it totally complicates your themes. You would have to introduce this in a later season, and you would have to set it up way more naturally. The first shot of this episode is the ghost guy. He exists. It's just a
He
ghost
just
exists in
rocks up,
Gotham.
yeah.
And it's a real ghost. It's not illusion. It's not Scooby-Doo. This is just a straight up ghost. Batman ends up realizing it's a ghost, and he's like, ghosts are real. And you would think that maybe this would change Batman's entire perception on reality. If a ghost is real, this confirms multiple religions.
Yeah.
You would really have to. This would shatter Batman.
Yeah, and also, is he not like, why don't my parents reach out to me?
Yeah, why aren't his parents ghosts as well? Wouldn't he be questioning that? It's like such a happy episode where it ends in such a happy way, where like Batman and Alfred are so like connected, and like it feels like a revitalization of their friendship and their relationship, but it's so bizarre. I don't like this episode.
Yeah, it didn't really work for me either. Even the first time I watched this, I was not that engaged with this one. Like, this one really didn't keep me going.
I think the Harvey Dent stuff was fine, but everything else was just super weird. I think the next episode actually is a lot better. Now I'm thinking about it, I think episode 7 isn't as bad.
Episode 7's not bad, man.
Episode 7's called Moving Target. Basically, Onomatopoeia and a bunch of other assassins are called in by Rupert Thorne to assassinate what they believe to be Jim Gordon, but it actually turns out to be Barbara Gordon. This episode has some really good writing. The main villain is sort of just there as a plot device, which I think is okay sometimes. I'm not a huge fan of Onomatopoeia. This was a character created by Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith is, I don't know how to feel about Kevin Smith. It's not a super deep character. He just says onomatopoeia, so like pow, bam, those types of things. That's all he can say. I think it's fun because I like when they start to use villains we haven't seen before. The thing that I like this episode for the most, actually, isn't the villain or the fight scenes, but it is Barbara and Jim Gordon's debate in this episode. Jim Gordon has a black and white view of criminality. He is straight up spilling what a lot of people don't really like to say out loud. It's something that maybe a lot of iterations of Batman actually would believe. It really fits his character because this is an older guy and he's kind of a boomer. Basically, he thinks that criminality isn't a product of the environment. It is not a product of mental instability or a bad background. It is not a problem of poverty. It is a moral failing. If you are on the street, or if you are a criminal, if you are stealing to get by or something like that, that is your fault. That's what Commissioner Gordon believes here. It is a foundational problem that leads to a lot of issues we have in real life related to criminality, poverty, and stuff like that. That it is ultimately just a moral failing and there's nothing to do about it. What I like about this show is that it doesn't just downright say Jim Gordon is wrong for believing this. Barbara Gordon is our different take on this debate. She believes that, she's a criminal defender. She is funded by the state to defend people who cannot afford a attorney. So she's defending, the lowest of the low, people who probably are morally corrupt. But at the end of the day, it's really important to still defend these people. And she believes that. And she's trying to get Jim Gordon to believe that. It's also about how Jim Gordon doesn't want to leave the city because he has an ego. His colleagues are saying, hey, you need to leave town, you need to skip town because you're in danger. And he wants to be, the boomer tough guy. I'm fine, I don't care, I'll just kill them if they come after me. But he's not thinking about other people.
Yeah, he's not. But it's also a matter of the fact that he doesn't feel safe leaving his own precinct with the criminals he has in it as well.
Right.
You know, he doesn't want to leave. I'm pretty sure that I could be completely mistaken, but I'm pretty sure there's a line in this episode where he's like, "How can I leave now with Flass and Bullock? You know, with them being what they are right now."
There's gray area in this episode
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
I really like. Like this is I love when it's themed this way, where it really is this is a huge topic in real life. This is a huge debate in real life, and they're perfectly using this as a character moment for these two characters. And at the end of the episode, there's a realization that the hit was not on Jim Gordon, but on Barbara Gordon, which kind of leads them to believe that Barbara is more of a threat to Rupert Thorne than Jim Gordon is. And what does that say about how Jim Gordon sees criminality? It doesn't downright say that Jim Gordon has changed his belief, because that's not how it works. You don't change your belief in a day, but it is a stepping stone.
And I also like being able to see the perspective of someone who has fought so hard for someone in criminal custody, and you are kind of trying to get them the best option, and they still throw it back in your face. I think that's a great moment for Barbara. Like, I really do think that is a really good moment for Barbara. I don't know if her direction in this show is going to be about becoming Batgirl. I don't really care if it is or isn't. I'm going to enjoy it. But either way, that's such a nice development for her, because this whole time she's been grappling with what is worth it within this city. And like, I think a lot of the narrative within the show is kind of about how much can we trust our police force, and how much can we trust the people within the city, and on top of that, how much can we force or trust the new Batman. And this is like kind of one of those episodes that shows that he may not be the best, but he's on their side to some extent. Like, they see eye to eye enough that they can help each other out here. Fucking episode 8, Nocturne. Now I think you and I kind of have differing perspectives on this episode. Not totally. I have seen this show twice, and I'm not gonna lie, the second time I saw this episode I was not quite as engaged in it. The plot of this episode is essentially that there is a circus in town that Harvey Dent is attending because he needs to get his points back at the polls ultimately, and so he's also cooperating with Leslie Tompkins' orphanage, and they're all there, and it's all just a big PR move to make him look as good as possible. Bruce Wayne, of course, is invited, and over the course of this circus, we see multiple children go missing, and they're all being drained of their life force by a little girl, and her brother stumbles upon what she's doing, and he doesn't support it whatsoever. Batman comes on the scene.
Killer Croc is in this episode.
Killer Croc is in this episode. Grey Ghost is alluded to, which I thought was a nice little reference. Like, I enjoy this episode on kind of a superficial level, but like, I think the biggest offense of this episode is just kind of how much it takes away from other stuff, because Harvey really kind of is in the back burner of this one, even though at the end of this one it of course takes the trajectory that it does, in which his face is splashed with the acid, and that's obviously a necessity. But the rest of this episode, I feel like it has a lot of similar situations with episode 5, where I just feel like it wasn't drafted enough.
I'm just conceptually against the idea of including supernatural elements in the first season. When it comes to Batman, I'm pretty biased about this. This is why I don't really like Ra's al Ghul that much. I like when the supernatural is very subtle, to where maybe it is explainable by science. Maybe ghosts are real, maybe they aren't. But in this show,
Yeah.
they straight up like this is just real. Like, you can just suck people's life force. Coming from a more realistic show that I want to take the writing more seriously, when you introduce this type of stuff into this world, it should really make people change the way they think about things. To Batman, this is just another criminal mishap, when it shouldn't
Yeah.
be. This is a girl that can suck the life force out of people. This is crazy. And I like what Batman does in this episode, because he shows a little bit of his altruistic side by saving
Yeah.
this little girl. It is just a girl, and everyone is entitled to life.
Yeah.
Everyone
But
deserves a
even in
second
that,
chance.
as much as I love that last moment there, because that really reminds me of a particular moment in Justice League that everyone knows what I'm talking
The
about.
swing set.
Yes, exactly. I love seeing moments like this, right? But this character's motivation is shite. Like, she literally drained the life force of these children because she's fucking tired. When Carrie Kelly is like, "Nah, you don't gotta save this one," I'm kind of like, yeah. I appreciate that he saves her, but the character itself is not fleshed out at all, and she's just a little monster because the episode is better served as her being this creepy little monster. But in making her this creepy little monster, I don't have the chance to feel as bad for her when she kills her own brother with a fucking bookshelf.
Yeah, and she regrets that, and it's like that's the human moment, but was it deserved? I don't even think that is a motivation. I just straight up think there is no motivation. Like she's not a simple character because she does change at the end, but she has literally no motivation. It feels like that was just not considered, and I just think from conception, I do not like this episode. I don't know how you're gonna feel about this, but now thinking about it and growing on it. I hate the Robin Easter eggs. Like I don't know why they did that. I don't see the point of it.
Yeah, honestly,
I don't
yeah.
it was literally just there to be there and it kind of hurts the show. It's distracting. Like why do these children need to be names of Bat family members? It's not important to the plot. It conflicts very hard because if any of these characters were to show up in a future season, they would need to explain this. Personally, this is the lowest low of this show,
Yeah.
and I'm very glad that it gets better after this.
Yeah, I was very nervous going into the last episode after this, but like on my first watch of this, I kind of appreciated the Easter egg a little bit with the Robins, but it is just fucking weird. Zach, I'm fucking sorry, okay? I was wrong. I was wrong, okay? I'm sorry.
Okay, the next episode gets much better. It's a two-parter, episode 9 and 10. The first one's called The Killer Inside Me. So, in the last episode, we get basically Thorne gives Harvey Dent a bunch of money to fund the campaign. That's what the circus was for. He's taking dirty money, he has to hide it. In order to receive this money, he's gonna have to drop the prosecution on
Someone on Rupert Thorne's payroll.
after Harvey does this, which this was a redeeming moment, and this is what I was talking about earlier in the video, or maybe it was last video. The fact that at first it seems like they're just doing a little switcheroo, like, oh, Harvey Dent's a bad person in this interpretation. But it's actually much more complex than that. He is a bad person, but at the end of the day, he is not the worst person in this city, and he's trying to be better than people like Rupert Thorne, but he's been corrupted slowly into taking Rupert Thorne's money just to assist his campaign. This was a moment where he realized that this compromise that he's doing isn't going to be worth it. He's realizing that he's being corrupted, and in a really brave moment, he decides not to drop the prosecution. And the court goes crazy. He goes into the bathroom. He's pretty proud of himself for what he's done. But unfortunately, it doesn't work out so well. He gets splashed in the face with acid.
I have to say, man, like, I really like these two episodes. I honestly, like, look, I think there's no point in talking about these two without just talking about them together, because if there's a two-parter in the season, this is it. You know, so the following episode from this is season 1, episode 10, Savage Night. And the two of these are, I think, maybe not the best the season has to offer, but I think in terms of Two-Face's story, I think this one really gets it right. I think it's an accurate depiction of it, but it's also quite different because, as I was saying earlier, there is relevance to the fact that it's on the opposite side of his face. Because in this interpretation of the character, his molded and disgusting side is his sensitive, soft part, while his other side is is the corrupted lawyer who has been, knowing about all this corruption in the city and allowing it to happen to kind of maintain his place within it all. And I think that they're kind of taking the name Two-Face into another way, because ultimately he, on the front, acts like he wants good for the city, but ultimately he's just doing whatever he has to keep his place. I think everyone in life has encountered somebody like this. I think that is kind of just the true definition of being two-faced. And that's definitely what Harvey is like in this. And in this one, he's really conflicted about it. But what I really, really love about this episode is that the one who kind of provokes him down this path is Bruce Wayne himself, because he doesn't understand empathy. He doesn't understand like human limitation. He keeps pressing and pressing and pressing to a point where this kind of comes out on him. And there's something that Bruce Wayne says to him early in this episode where he says, "Come on, Harvey, like, you never give up. It's not in your nature." And then later on in the episode, when he's trying to kill Rupert Thorne and his son, he's like, "I don't give up. It's not in my nature." And I think there is so much consequences that land on the character of Bruce Wayne and Batman in this moment. I'm really happy that they emphasize that. I think, like, without this point, I think a lot of their kind of other developments surrounding Batman would have been a little redundant. But here we really get to see that Batman, so far, he's really not better for the city yet, because he's kind of provoking it in the same kind of way that the criminals are, and in this one he's dealing with the unfortunate reality that as much as he is trying to do better, his method around people, which is ultimately the most important thing, is extremely flawed, and that is what ends up being the payoff with his relationship with Alfred. Because in this one, the killer inside me, there's a particular moment in which he shouts at Alfred like really horribly, but then obviously in the next episode, once he's seen everything that's unfolded, he owns up to the fact that he has to respect this man more.
He calls him Alfred for the first time. The thing I like about the killer inside me specifically, because I think these two episodes have two, they are separate. They have two themes. I think the first episode is more so about Bruce Wayne and Harvey Dent, and how Bruce Wayne is Two-Face as well. He is
Yeah.
pretending to be someone else. And in fact, he is triple-faced. Batman is the biggest liar in this show. His Batman isn't even his true self. Like, he's straight up putting on a character every person he talks to, other than maybe Alfred sometimes. When you have this two-faced, methodical person, Bruce Wayne was the worst person to try to help Harvey Dent. I mean, in a similar way to maybe Firefly, Harvey Dent was provoked. Why would you take this guy out to a dinner when he's repeatedly said that he doesn't want to?
And you're doing it for your own personal gain.
As well, yeah, that as well. I mean, for Batman, everything is just an investigation, and this really backfired on Batman. I think you see that backfiring in the next episode mostly, and I think when we get to that moment, I think there are parts that could have been even more consequential. But for this episode, it was just a perfect retelling of a classic like Two-Face story. I think even better than most iterations of this character.
And I love the direction that they end up going with it in the next one. I think there's a lot of stuff that happens in this that I really didn't expect them to do. For example, Harvey is kind of legitimately terrifying to some degree. Like, he burns a man alive. He beats up a guy in like a bar for calling him a freak. We really get to see the worst of this human being, and then we get to see kind of that he's also this coward. Ultimately, like, he's this guy who just has so much self-loathing, and he's just really pathetic ultimately, but like, he's still the man who's capable of doing all of this. And I just think he's a really interesting interpretation because he's extremely self-aware, and I love that about his character. And that's something that we have to talk about within the next episode, where he's held in custody in Arkham. He doesn't want to be treated like he's special just because he knows so much stuff, because ultimately he doesn't deserve the chance to walk free, because he's killed a man. He's killed a man in the, in the most blatant sense of the word. Like, there's no way to hide what he did. He did what he did, and he's not going to lie about it either. So just because he has information, he feels like he's being given the second chance that isn't justified.
We already set up Barbara's beliefs that everyone deserves to be defended in court. Everyone deserves to have that chance. You cannot just put the gavel down and say someone is entirely guilty, because everyone, at the end of the day, there's some part of them that is good, or at least that's Barbara's belief. And I think Barbara is the true altruistic hero in this season, as opposed to Batman. In a previous episode, episode 5, we are introduced to Arkham Asylum before. Barbara Gordon, kind of in a similar situation to Harvey Dent, has to deal with someone that does not think the same way. It was like the Pharaoh character was trying to escape Arkham, and she was very patient with this person and ended up apprehending them in a way that was not harmful. Barbara is that altruistic hero. She is something that everyone can look up to in the show, and I think that's what Batman ultimately is going to try to model himself after.
Yeah, definitely. Her fight for kind of just truth within the city, even, like, while there's truth, while she understands that there's truth to what Harvey is saying, there is more at stakes than just him. Like, this is a situation larger than him, no matter what way he looks at it. And what I really, really love about the direction of it, eventually anyway, is that there isn't a good end. Is that they end on this note that, like, Harvey is dead and they're not going to be able to bring down Rupert Thorne. And I like that, because I don't know, too often, like, does Batman win by using his methods that are flawed. That's not how you get real results. And I think in this one, they try to go about it in a better way, and the result is kind of still the same. Not as a result of, like, Batman, but as a result of just the city itself, I think a lot of people dislike the moment in which he picks up the gun. But if you don't like the moment, you clearly didn't watch it. Harvey and Barbara are on their way back to her vehicle in this very tension-laden moment where essentially Harvey has been tracked down by the mob and they intend on murdering him. But obviously, with the mob, underneath Rupert Thorne's payroll is Harvey Bullock and Officer Flass. And they get back to the car. Bullock is stopped by Jim Gordon, thank God. But the one they don't account for is Flass. And Flass comes out of the shadows in a very similar manner to a very certain thing that happened to Bruce Wayne a very long time ago. And he aims the gun and he murders Harvey right then and there. Or at least he was trying to murder Barbara, actually, but Harvey took the bullet. And, that's kind of his redemption ultimately. But Batman sees this and he fucking clocks him one. But then when his gun goes out of his hand and he's kind of faced with this situation where the one thing that could have made a difference, the one thing that they've been progressing towards all season, is taken from them. And it's not some mugger in some alleyway. It's a police officer. He picks up that gun and he aims it at him. And we see off screen that the bullets have been fired. We just see Barbara's face. We hear the gunshots. And then when we cut back, we see a horrified Detective Flass and we see the bullets are all around his head. And then Batman fucking clocks him another one and throws that gun in the river. And he looks so pissed at himself, and just the situation in general when he does it. And I just think it's perfect. I love that moment for his character there, where he's just tempted. Because ultimately, right, I think there's a lot of people who don't like a Batman who uses guns. I am one of them. I do not want my Batman using guns. But there's an enormous difference between this and Zack Snyder's Batman, where he intentionally fires multiple gunshots around his head, almost as if he was contemplating with each shot, or almost saying, I can't kill you. I think that's such a powerful moment for the character.
There is not just a huge difference between that and Zack Snyder's Batman, it is a massive difference, astronomical. This is a moment that is induced in the narrative. It is a consequence of the writing that is aware that Batman shouldn't be using guns, that is aware that Batman shouldn't kill. That is the entire point of the scene. That is what the scene is trying to prove about Batman. But ultimately, again, like what we talked about in the last video, this is a flawed Batman. This is a Batman who is failing. This is a Batman who has failed in the last episode, who has sort of almost created the problem in the first place. They are here because Bruce Wayne provoked Two-Face. I think all of that, not just the anger towards the city and corruption, but anger at himself, is reflected in why he picks up that gun and why he also refuses to kill him. It is such a powerful moment. It is one of the highlights of this show and proves to me that this is a worthwhile show, that even though there are some episodes that really, really do not help with the theming, there's also these moments that really set it above so many other interpretations of this character. That's why I'm critical of this season, because this potential, they've proven through stuff like this that they can do this, that they can evolve Batman and make him something new and better, and they need to prove that. Season 2 needs to really improve upon the problems with Season 1, and there's quite a few problems. I want to see a Season 2 that every episode is as gripping as episode 4 and 10. I really do.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you. And just to add to kind of your point there, when you hit so close to the nail on the head here, so many of the things that I have been wanting to see from this character, and maybe that is a subjective view that might only be shared amongst you and I, when you get so close to doing that, and when you do actually achieve it in some places, you can't help but just be left wanting more. As we talked about in the video we made previous to the show being released, we talked about how this is going to really define the character yet again, the same way the animated series did. And so far, we're only one season in, and I really hope there's a hell of a lot more to come out of this. Because if there is, I really think that something is down the road for us here, that we get to see a really well isolated, profoundly done interpretation of this character, and just a great hodgepodge of themes that relate to our time while also keeping the tone completely and utterly timeless and also authentic to the books, to the roots of the character, all the way back to Bill Finger. And I really can't wait for season 2, man. I really can't, because as much as we might have complained about some of the episodes here and there, like I'm so happy ultimately.
The last thing we can talk about, and this is gonna be a very long video. I'm gonna put a crazy title on this video. There is a scene, and I really don't like when they do this. Joker gets a kind of appearance at the end. At
Oh
least it's
yeah.
implied that it's Joker. This is similar to my feelings for the Batman. I don't think it's worse, but the way that he's included in the plot is worse. In the Batman, they very much tried to induce him and relate him to the themes of the existing movie. In this one, it is literally just like an ad for season 2. It has nothing
Yeah,
to
pretty
do
much.
has nothing to do with
Yeah.
anything. It's just, yeah, Joker exists, you get to see his eyes, and I'm just like, no. Personally, I wouldn't even want Joker until like season 3 or 4.
Come on,
Would
fuck
be
that.
fine.
Season 5.
I'd be fine if he never shows up at all, because that is why Harley is so strong in this show, is because Joker doesn't exist. And the
Yeah,
fact that
right?
Joker
Like,
might exist might mess up her character in season 2, because she needs a redemption at this point. They released this show not knowing what the feedback would be, and I'm hoping that they're getting feedback like ours. I know that many people praise the show, but there's some things that they really do need to improve on and get right in the next one. I want to see new villains, and I think rehashing Joker again, especially since we're using Bruce Wayne to really characterize Batman. We've seen this before. We've seen Joker and his relationship with Batman. I mean, my college professor in game design talks about this story. Everyone knows about Joker and Batman's connection, the romantic themes or whatever. Like, we get it. I've seen it before. I'm sure it could be done in a cooler way, and I'm sure they probably will, but I'd personally like if they just dropped Joker and did something else.
just at least for a while, man. Like, I don't know, because I was really thinking, like, at one point in this whole thing where all of this stuff was revealed, I was thinking that they weren't going to do Joker at all, and that it was just going to be Harley, and that was going to be kind of the placeholder, the arch nemesis for this interpretation. And I would have kind of loved that, to be honest, man. But I guess that's not the way they want to go with it, because ultimately Bruce Timm does have a writing credit in that, so I guess this is probably partially his doing. And either way, I'm still going to be there for it, because I'm sure if they're doing the Joker, it's probably not going to be the same as we've seen before. But I think ultimately that probably kind of wraps up our thoughts on the whole of the show. Wouldn't you agree?
I do agree. Ultimately, it's a good show. I'm not going to give it a rating. I never rate anything because,
Let us know how many George Clooney's you'd give it out of 5.
yeah, how many George Clooney's would you give this show? What did you guys think? Like, I know there's a lot of people who didn't connect with it the way we did, and I really want to know why they believe that, and I really want to know if this video might have changed anybody's minds on that.
Yeah, honestly, yeah. Well, look, lads, we'll be here around for season 2 and probably many more videos about Cape Crusaders to come. Maybe not in the immediate future, but we'll see.